Good evening, everybody. Good evening to our American Hammers. Good evening to Hammers all across the world, or morning and afternoon. Certainly in the UK, it's the evening, almost into tomorrow at this point. So really appreciate our special guest being here. Tonight we have Jim Kearns, who is the author of the West Ham blog, The H List. I'm sure many of you know the blog, have been following it for a number of years like myself. Or maybe you're new to it too. Certainly had an excellent post this last week that really blew up. So we wanted to get Jim in to talk about that a little bit more. We'll let everybody introduce themselves. I've got my co-host here, Johnny, who's about 20 miles from me. Johnny, 15, 20 miles?
Yeah, just about. And can you believe this guy won't come down to see me? I mean, come on.
I'm the worst. I'm the worst. I didn't make it down to Stowe this weekend for the West Ham supporters group, but shout out to Philadelphia Hammers as well. So, Johnny, that's your handle there, right? Where can we follow you?
Correct, yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter at Johnny Otero. John Jackson. There's only a few John Jacksons on Facebook, so if you want to find me in there, go ahead. So Twitter's probably the safer bet.
Good stuff. And wearing the classic Philadelphia Phillies baseball hat, which is a beautiful claret color. They also paired that with sky blue back in the day, and one day we'll get those colors back here in the city of brotherly love. There it is. What's that, the away version?
Yeah.
Now on to our special guest, Jim. I don't think you need a whole lot of introduction. As I just said, you're the author of the H List. Why don't you tell us where you are, how long you've been writing, and how we can reach you on any kind of social media?
Okay, well, thanks for having me, firstly. Yeah, Jim Kearns. I'm at the H List on Twitter, which is about the only social media that I do. But you can find me there, and obviously then the writing is on the HList.blogspot or something. I can't actually remember. I can't remember the address, but anyway, if you stick the H List in, I'm sure you'll find it. Yeah, I'm in London. I've been a West Ham fan all my life, and started writing the H List about a long time ago. So I think it was the season after we got to the FA Cup final, so about 2006. Wrote it for a few years, essentially trying to kind of recapture what I felt was this sort of fanzine style commentary. I don't know if you kind of remember that in the old days you would get copies of fanzines like On the Terraces and Overland and Sea, On a Mission, that kind of hard copy fan produced media that was sold outside of grounds. And I always thought it was great. I thought it was irreverent. I thought it was a different type of writing than you could get anywhere else. And I kind of wanted to recapture that a bit with the H List. So that's what I was doing. Then kind of between the Kirbishley / Allardyce / Grant era, I sort of lost the will to live, but also certainly lost the will to write about West Ham in that period. It wasn't all that interesting. And then when we moved to the London Stadium, I just kind of had a bit of time. I got the passion back to write again. So I probably for the last sort of 2 or 3 seasons, I've been writing fairly consistently. Through 2019, not been able to so much. But as you kind of alluded to, John, I wrote a piece last week, which was called The Slow Dissolving Dream, which was just to highlight, I guess, that I had started to think a little bit differently about West Ham. And we can talk about that. But I guess the headline of it was I kind of hit upon a feeling, I guess, that after several years of watching the current ownership run the club in a way that absolutely baffled me, I began to question actually maybe whether or not what they were considering to be success was the same as what the three of us would consider to be success. And I decided or concluded that the answer was probably no. And actually that what's really happening at the moment is the club is essentially being readied for a sale. And therefore there's not much long-term expenditure. They're just kind of bobbing along, hoping to stay mid-table. If they get a bit higher, that's great. But the important thing is not to go down. And, I might be several years behind the rest of the fan base here in getting to that point. But it did kind of slightly change the way that I look at the club at the moment, because if they're not trying to win, what are any of us doing?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we as fans certainly appreciate that question. I mean, that's ultimately why we follow sports as much as West Ham are the lovable losers a lot of the time, and we take a bit of pride in that here and there. Essentially, we'd like to see us win something, and we'd at least like to think those who are the guardians of our club as owners also would like that as well. So let's talk about the article a little bit. I know in the beginning it's interesting. You go over that the last 10 years or so, you've believed that those in charge of West Ham basically don't know what they're doing. What are some of the events that stuck out to you that originally brought you to this conclusion?
Well, I guess the hiring of Avram Grant possibly could have been a canary. I mean, how much time have we got? But Avram Grant would have been a big one. Let me. I mean, if I think about that question, maybe a way to answer it is to pose a question back, which is to say, in the 10 years since these guys have taken over to now, what do we think about the club has improved? And my feeling on that is that the answer is actually not very much. If you think about the different components of an elite football club, think about the academy. Does the academy produce any more players or any better players than it did 10 years ago? I'd argue probably not. Talking as someone who has kids who play, I can tell you the reputation of the West Ham Academy is quite bad among parents whose kids are being targeted. So that side of it doesn't feel like it's any better. Do we buy players with any more intelligence than we did 10 years ago? Or do we even buy them in a different way than we did 10 years ago, despite the way that football has changed and the data analytics and revolution? The answer to that is no. It still seems to me to be agent-led. We don't have a scouting or an analytics department of any note. Do we sell players for money? No. We tend to buy older players who are at the end of their contracts. Think Zabaleta, Hernandez, Yarmolenko, lots of players who don't have resale value. We continue to invest in those sorts of players. And as a fan, does my relationship with the club, is it any better than it was 10 years ago? Well, I don't know if you've been following this, but the club refuses to engage with independent sports associations. They've got their own official supporters board who they go and speak to about, that's what they consider to be fan consultation, a hand-picked group of people. So that's all. I see my relationship with the club as being entirely transactional. Every time the club interacts with me, they want money from me. You want to go on a season ticket waiting list. You want to, be involved in pretty much any way with the club. You have to pay money for the privilege of doing so. So really, the only thing that's materially different about West Ham now than 10 years ago is that we have a new stadium. I would argue that stadium has not been a positive for fans. The only positive I can think of is you can get more fans in, which is not nothing, but it's not as good a football watching venue as the one that we had. And the fact that the club is now financially better off, it's not as a result of anything they've done particularly. It's just they happen to have been in the Premier League when television rights exploded. But in the end, none of us support a balance sheet. So the fact that the club is solvent and financially healthy is great, but that's got to translate into something more for us as supporters to care about it. So I guess it's a very long-winded way of answering your question, but we're not a modern run club. We're not a modern club. We're not a well-run club. And as a fan, I think it's hard to look at that and see any kind of coherent strategy for the future.
So and we appreciate the in-depth answers. I think we were talking a little bit off air about just having the forum and the venue to be able to answer things a little more in depth is always good compared to just sound bites. So we're willing to let you go. Just keep talking if you want, Jim. So when did your view change? So you're seeing these events unwind, you're seeing things happen, and it's just suddenly not adding up for you that what they're doing in fact isn't just that they don't have a clue. It's maybe willful ignorance or a larger structure with a different end goal in mind. Was there one cementing moment for you, or was it just those things all adding up?
I can't think of a particular moment where my worldview changed. I think I stopped writing the H list, and at least one of the reasons was there was only so many ways you can say these things. There's only so many ways you can say we need a director of football, not one who's hired by the manager, but one who hires the manager. We need to have a better, bigger scouting organization. We need better data analytics. We need a coherent strategy for buying younger players who are fitter and faster. Health is a skill. Don't buy Jack Wilshere or don't sign Jack Wilshere and then get upset when he misses the season. Don't buy Yarmolenko when he's missed the season with injury and then get upset when he misses the following season. But you're entering into all of this stuff in good faith, right? Or, you guys are having these shows every week and you're talking about this and it's all in good faith. You have to assume that you and the owners and everyone who's involved with West Ham has the same end goal, which is that you want the team to be as successful as humanly possible. And I guess at one point what happened was I started to think, well, I have been bashing my head against the brick wall for the last 3 years, trying to divine some kind of science out of the art of running West Ham, and I couldn't get anywhere. I just couldn't divine any logic behind what was happening. And then the only way it made sense to me was to effectively change the question slightly and stop saying, why would you run this club if you're trying to be more successful? And maybe change the question to, you know, does this constitute success? And that's effectively when I looked at it that way, then it started to make much more sense. You know, and maybe, you know, this is a long answer again, I apologize, but, you know, another canary in the coal mine is you spend £12 million on a training ground. And that training ground is a joke. Like, I've been over there, I have a season ticket with the women's team. I've been over there to watch them. That training ground is nonsensical. And if you look at teams like Leicester, Southampton, Brighton, they are spending tens of millions of pounds on their training facilities. And the only real reason that you wouldn't invest that money in a training ground is if you don't want the long-term expenditure on your balance sheet. And then the reason that you wouldn't want that is because you're gearing up to sell. So you don't want to sell an asset that already has £100 million committed in the balance sheet to future expenditure. So they've done this kind of bodge job where they paid £12 million and, you know, put in a porter cabin and all the rest of it. And yeah, it's when I started to view all of those kinds of things through this particular prism, they started to make more sense.
So that's a really interesting point. Let's revisit that a second, just so we can understand it fully. I think what you're saying is that if they were to truly invest in something that was tens of millions of pounds, you're potentially putting any future owners on the hook for those payments.
Correct. Which is not to say that those owners wouldn't want that. I mean, I think if any owners who come in to buy West Ham have any ambitions about taking West Ham any further, they're definitely going to have to build a new training ground or invest in the current one. But you're leaving it for those guys to do it.
Yeah.
If Sullivan and Gold set it up now and they can't get a buyer in the next 5 years, they've got to pay it.
Don't you think that example right there is a perfect way to think that maybe they are a little bit of both, your original premise and the new premise? Because really, if, you know, having better players, having a successful football club, having a great training ground, all of that would add value and would ultimately net them more in the final sale. But our owners they continue to get in their own way, which means the original premise that they're not very good at what they do isn't completely wrong, right? I mean, like, isn't there a rumor now that like Jack is like as our director of football, that the son, you know, what is he, 21 or something like that, 19? So
yeah, well, there's certainly a rumor that he's in the mechanism, the decision-making mechanism. You know, that being said, I don't particularly have any. Well, you know, let's take Jack Sullivan, right? He's been a bit of a lightning rod. I don't have a huge issue with him being in the decision-making process, so long as he's way down the totem pole. If the answer is he's learning his trade, fine. Now, I would question greatly whether West Ham is a good place to learn your trade. You know, I can think of several other football clubs where they must have relationships where they would be far better at sending him off to Brentford or somewhere, you know, in the lower leagues where he could learn it. But fine. But yes, to your point, are they particularly good at running football clubs? Well, I'm not convinced there's a massive track record there that suggests that they are. And at least one of the theories that I put forward in the article is these guys made a lot of money in porn. They made a lot of money in the adult industry. And actually the skills that you need to succeed in that industry are not the same as the skills that you need to succeed in other industries. So I don't think they've got a ton of business acumen in a traditional sense of the word. You know, in order to make a lot of money in those industries, it seems to me they required other things, like a willingness, a thick skin, a willingness to do things that other people weren't prepared to do at that time. And it's fine. I don't have an issue with that. But running a porn industry, running a porn business, selling it, investing a lot of your money into property is not the same as building a business from the ground up and understanding customer interaction, understanding market trends, data, all of that. That doesn't exist in that world.
And we have an example of them running a football club before in Birmingham City. And where are they now? So it's not like they built up something and you know, left a wonderful legacy there. In fact, you know, when they took over West Ham United, we were told repeatedly by Birmingham fans, This is the worst thing that's ever going to happen to you. Don't believe anything they say. They're going to lie. They're going to move you into a new stadium. They're just going to take money out of the club. And I remember on Knees Up Mother Brown, all these people going, "Oh, you guys, it's just because you're terrible. No, you're just a terrible football club in a terrible city, and we hate you, and you're in northern blah blah blah." They weren't far off.
Yeah, I haven't met a Birmingham fan yet who has spoken positively about their time in charge, and certainly not about the way they left. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, I suppose we should try and be fair. I think we should try and look at both sides of the argument. And one thing I would say is that the West Ham balance sheet looks substantially healthier now than it did. We were being run by an Icelandic bank that had gone bust, or Icelandic creditors, essentially. The club were selling future season ticket revenues. The club was in a disastrous state, and they weathered that. Now, again, I would argue that really the only thing they did was get themselves into the Premier League and stay there at a time when TV rights went through the roof. It's the growth in our commercial revenues, as an example, are just an example of how they've monetized every transaction with ordinary fans, which I'm not convinced I think is a good thing. But the club is certainly a much more viable asset now than it was a decade ago, and therefore that has to be better for us than being a far worse asset. So we have to accept that side of it, I think. But again, I'll come back to my earlier point. We don't support a balance sheet. None of us are sitting here looking at P&L and going, "Oh, that I'm really happy about that." We want to see the team improve, and we want to see a coherent plan for advancement. And that, I think, is what's missing if you assume that the club is being run on this fairly short-term basis. And I guess, the thing that I've missed out is that there is a clause in the current lease agreement with the London Stadium, which means that if the current owners sell the property before 2023, then they are obliged to pay a certain percentage of that to the public purse. Once they get past 2023, they can sell the club in its entirety and take the full proceeds. So that's kind of why, again, I think there's this 2023 thing, which is in there where they're saying, we're not going to sell anything before then, unless we get some absolutely ridiculous offer. But even then, I don't think they would. And I think everything then puts us in a holding pattern until 2023, which is another reason for this kind of feeling of treading water.
Yeah. So I've kind of, on the last few shows, the last few Friday Night Likes or AHTV and Friends shows that we've done, I've kind of argued a little tongue-in-cheek that the scariest thing for me is that Jack Sullivan has anything to do with transfers. Not because he shouldn't be getting experience, because he absolutely should, but because that experience to me suggests that maybe they are serious about him taking over down the line, and maybe the family is here to stay. So how do you pair that with that 2023 date? Do you think somebody would they put him in a position to gain football experience if they don't expect him to be at West Ham, or maybe it's at a different football club?
I think it might be the latter. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. They give Jack his apprenticeship here, sell the club, whenever. So say 2024, $500 million. Let's bear in mind, David Gold is 80 something, Sullivan is 70 something and has had heart surgery. Gold's children are, Jacqueline Gold is a very successful CEO of Ann Summers and Knickerbox and stuff. They're pretty successful. And I think if they were going to have any involvement, I think they would be there. I think they sell, they take the money and probably buy a smaller club and let Jack have a go at that. Would be my. I've no inside information on that, but that's my guess.
Sure.
I think that makes sense.
Genuinely enjoy it. I mean, he does seem to be somewhat passionate about it. And wants to be involved. And you wouldn't imagine that his father would be forcing him into doing this, and especially being involved with the women's team and everything else that he does.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I would say I think he's actually done a pretty good job with the women's team. I think. I have to eat some words on that. I was not very impressed with him being given that opportunity. I thought it was pretty obviously nepotism in action. But yeah, he's done okay. Whether the circumstances around it are really all that great, it's another question. But he's done all right. I think that they're an established women's team now who'll probably stay in the Premier League for a little while unless they do something ludicrous. So he has done okay. But would we consider, if he was to apply for a senior position at West Ham tomorrow, and he wasn't related to the chairman, and his experience was 2 years of running a women's team, yeah, we wouldn't give that, as fans, we wouldn't give that any credence at all. So he is going to have to progress via nepotism probably for a while.
Well, so there's someone in the chat room right now saying that the rumor in Brazil is that we have agreed a fee for Gabigol, and that Jack Sullivan's the one doing the deal.
Oh, he speaks Portuguese now.
Does he?
I don't know. He's getting better and better.
That's not going to be a rumor. You realize all over here. Jack Sullivan speaks Portuguese. He's quite educated.
So there's lots of there's lots of rumors that he was part of a delegation to Portugal. I think either last summer or the summer before. We've obviously had lots of success in Portugal. You'll remember the William Carvalho deal and the Dildo Brothers email. So we had tremendous success over there previously. I don't know. I mean, look, I've heard some rumors that Jack's had some involvement in transfers previously. I would like to think that there are several layers above him, but in the end, he's the chairman's son, and if he's going, if they want him in the room, he'll be in the room. Look, Gabigol would be a good signing, I think. But
and let's be fair. I mean, he can't be a lot worse than deals we've tried to do before. So I think that's one of the worst things about the way the club has been run for 10 years. It's the fact that all of our transfer deals seem to be, we come in with this low, insulting fee, and then we give just enough to say, oh, look, we tried, and we go after these big name players, and then we sign the types of players you've talked about previously, which is, no transfer fee up front, big wages, and we think that's more intelligent.
Yeah, see, Rich, I just put his comment up on the screen, which we'll give the boys some slack, guys. It's just a little bit of teasing, Rich, I think. I would say with Jack, at least from my own personal perspective, I've got no problem with him being in the room, like Jim said. I think you don't get experience without being given experience. And I'd like to think, if I owned a multi-million-pound football club and I had a son who was interested in doing some business, I'd stick him in the room as well. But it's also what role is appropriate for him as well. And I think that's more of what we're discussing, and what is the appropriate level of involvement for somebody with his experience, which, if we had a proper director of football that knows the business and really played that position correctly, he could learn from the best. But that's kind of an issue that we have with West Ham. Jim, what did you make of the ironic thing of you're writing this article and you're kind of airing your graces about what's going on, and if I'm not mistaken, in the middle of your article, Pellegrini gets sacked, or this is at least noted in the middle of your article. So maybe after you've written it, Pellegrini's fired, and that kind of chaos ensues. What did that signal for you? Was there something kind of salient about the points you were making, and then this news comes out?
Well, I mean, it was pretty inconsiderate of them to fire him, 2,000 words in. But I mean, him being fired, from my perspective, probably a couple of months too late. I always thought he was a slightly curious appointment, if I'm honest. I sort of see China as like a retirement home for footballers and managers, and getting someone back from there always to me felt like a little bit of a risk. A point I've made in the article is that I think he took a lot of money to shut up about what was needed at West Ham, as opposed to, and again, this is a theory, this is nothing I've heard, but I just have a theory that Moyes, the last time, probably wanted a bit more control within the club than Sullivan was prepared to give him. Whereas I think Pellegrini probably couldn't believe his luck that he was out in China and then was suddenly offered £8 million a year and, a chance to come back to the Premier League. And I think that one of the conditions of that was that he didn't really want too far-reaching changes. So he took a big wad of cash and he brought some of his family and friends in around him. But there wasn't, as far as I could tell anyway, any material change to the structure of the club. So him going was, I felt, probably overdue. Probably not a bad thing, but I'm not sure I think it runs contrary to my kind of chain of thought, which is that it's all fairly short term. I mean, I think the appointment of Moyes is, ironically, I think Moyes is actually a slightly longer term appointment. I think Moyes has a vision for football clubs in a way that I haven't seen Pellegrini have. So I'm, relative to I think the rest of the fan base, I'm more supportive of Moyes because I actually think he has a bit more leverage this time and therefore might be able to get some of these changes that we're talking about that we want. I think Moyes might try and drive some of those through. So yeah, sorry, I don't really know if I've answered your question, but it didn't really change my thinking about what I was writing because they haven't put anybody on an 8-year contract, right, that takes them beyond that potential sale date. I don't think you're going to see much that takes any. There's not going to be any expenditure that goes much beyond that sale date, beyond probably a couple of player contracts.
Yeah, if I cast my mind back to Pellegrini initial hire. In fact, let me go one step back from there. Moyes, at the end of his tenure last time, I thought deserved the chance, really, to stay on at least 6 months and give it a crack. We'll see what this term, has for him in store. But I was excited about the Pellegrini hire. I got to say, I mean, he'd only been out of the league, I think, a year, maybe a year and a half. Obviously, comes with the reputation of winning leagues. And in that first summer, at least, it seemed like we were signing some players and getting some bodies in that we really needed, getting rid of some of the dead wood from the Bilic era as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think he had.
Go ahead.
I think he had a greater pedigree, than anyone I had seen us linked with before, or perhaps Rafa Benitez, who it seems like we got close to. But Pellegrini was certainly a step up above anybody that we'd had manage us previously. So I agree. I was a bit concerned about the China thing, because that didn't seem to me like the kind of step that you would take if you were really keen to keep your oar in kind of elite level football. But yeah, a big name, a league-winning manager. But again, I come back, I think, to this point of, what was Pellegrini's long-term overarching vision for West Ham? And the kinds of questions I think that I would be asking any manager coming into West Ham would be, you've got this stadium, it's actually a problem. The fans are discontented. How do you propose to deal with that? You've got this unbelievable catchment area. The catchment area that West Ham have for picking up young players and kind of dredging the East Essex and East London, playing fields for footballers is unparalleled. They have access to young players in a way that so many other clubs don't. What would any new manager propose to do about that? And number 3, would you work under a director of football? And if the answer is no, then you're not getting the job. But those are the kind of things that I think that I would be looking at. And I didn't really have much confidence that Pellegrini was doing any of that. Pellegrini seemed to me the ultimate short-term appointment because he was a big name who could attract players and he wanted money to spend, and so they gave it to him. And 18 months down the line, we're not really any further on than when he came. There haven't been any changes implemented that I can see that make any difference. And the team and the squad still look every bit as disjointed to me as they did when he came in. And that really is the bigger problem that we have, is the just lack of cohesion around what we do.
I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel kind of duped by it all because, like I said, I was quite optimistic after Pellegrini was hired. I was optimistic about seeing some of the names that were coming in. And I was more optimistic still when we got in a director of football. I think I overlooked that it was Pellegrini's mate. I think I was okay settling for it being Pellegrini's mate because we finally had something that on the surface was going to push the board into the background. And in fairness, they were quiet, or at least they were quiet in the mainstream media. They may not have been quiet on some of the fan forums and everything else that seems to be permeating from the club at any given time as well. John, jump in here too. Did you get a sense of optimism around that time?
I thought it was a brilliant appointment when it happened. I really believed that we had turned a corner. We finally had someone with pedigree, someone with reputation. And to be fair, I do think his reputation affected our football club. I think that Anderson and Aller, there's some players I don't know if they would have come and played if it was just David Moyes continuing. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and the lure of the Premier League and the almighty pound is all that matters. But I feel like that did have something to do with it. We did get a director of football, in whatever way we got one, and they did bring in people that they wanted. But I think your greater point: did the structure of West Ham United change? The answer is obviously no. The structure will never change because the ultimate point of your article is correct. They don't want to do anything that's going to upset how much money they put into the club and how much they're going to get out of it in the end. And so I think that is the ultimate truth that will dominate us, unless they happen to get lucky. And I think that's what they were thinking they were going to do with Pellegrini. They were thinking he was going to come in here, he was going to buy some flair players, and they love buying. That's what they'll spend money on, flair players, right? All day long. That's the only thing they'll spend money on: is a striker, an attacking midfielder, and maybe a winger. But they thought they would get him. He'd bring some people in. We go up to 8th, 6th, and then they're going to get even more money. But instead, what we thought he was and what they thought he was turned out not to be true. So
there's an interesting point as well about, you spoke about debt before, right, Jim, with facilities, training grounds, and things of that nature. And I believe they make a certain amount back from the loans that they give. So in some ways, they're incentivized to create debt within the club, but that's possibly only for non-fixed assets, right? So maybe they don't mind spending a little bit of money on players because they're loaning the money to the club and then receiving interest back on the loans that they give to the club. But when it comes to the fixed assets, you don't necessarily want that to be passed on to any future owner, or any future owner would at least want their own way of pushing the club forward when it comes to a fixed asset type of debt, or how the club should be structured and the infrastructure around it.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think also you do have to look at what the owners are doing and say, I don't think that they're asset strippers. I don't think that they are sitting there thinking 17th is good enough. I think 17th is good enough, but I think they would like to finish higher. If nothing else, the Burnley thing, they don't want angry mobs below them throwing coins and lighters at them again. So I think they are prepared to invest, but I think that it's kind of with a view of catching lightning in a bottle in the way they kind of did in 15-16 when the league collapsed, turned upside down. They got Payet. They had Allardyce's defence and they had Payet, and all of a sudden, actually they should have gone in the Champions League that year. I kind of feel like the way that we run is sort of hoping for another one of those. Mm-hmm. And that's not really a strategy. That's just kind of sitting in there and hoping that everybody else collapses. And, that's what happened in 15-16. If you remember, we finished above Chelsea, we finished above Liverpool. The problem was that we finished below Southampton and Leicester as well. So, that longer term strategy doesn't exist. But I do think they realise that you need to buy decent players in order to at least be a comfortable mid-table side. Clearly being a Champions League side would boost the valuation of the club, right? I mean, if you can guarantee annuity income from the Champions League, you're talking about an extra 80 to 100 million pound guaranteed revenues every year for any buyer coming in. So they'd be foolish to not want that. But I think correctly, in my opinion, that they have divined that the level of investment required to get there is too great for them, and also financial fair play prohibits it. Financial fair play has been introduced with the aim of keeping the status quo as it is. Don't ever be fooled into thinking it's about parity or fairness or anything like that. It's to maintain the status quo. So I think they realise that, therefore, if they don't have that, they're going to have to give up the reins to a different way of thinking and a different way of approaching the club. And I think there is a degree of ego there, which says that Sullivan's not just going to turn all this over to Ted Knutson at StatsBomb and let them buy, the 5 players with the best expected goals ratio, whatever. That's not going to happen. They're not going to change the way they run the club. And that, I think, comes back to this point of they're just going to spend enough to sit in and wait for a buyer post 2023.
But we heard those statements. We heard Champions League football. We heard a world-class stadium for a world-class team. Why do you think the owners would make promises that they knew they couldn't keep?
Well, it depends on your definitions, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that until they go, they will continue to argue that is a world-class stadium. 60,000 people can sit in it. There are plenty of West Ham fans who like the stadium, by the way. I'm not one of them, but there are a decent number of people who like it. And you can get 20,000 more fans in than you ever could at Upton Park. So it probably depends on your definition of world class. But Karen Brady's never ever going to go back on that, by the way. So it's going to remain world class until the day they sell it, and a new buyer potentially knocks it down. And then the other stuff, you have to say that, right? I mean, the great lie of Premier League or even European football, the great lie is that it's competitive and that everybody has a chance of winning, which is why Leicester winning the league was actually the greatest thing to ever happen to the top clubs, because it allowed them to point to that to say, oh, we're not rigging it in our own favour. Look, Leicester just won the Premier League. But we all know that, and one of my big criticisms of Sullivan and Gold actually is they voted for some of these financial changes that have actually, continued to enshrine West Ham as a team who can't get into the Champions League. They talk about turkeys voting for Christmas
didn't they vote for league position determines the amount of payout? I mean, that seemed insane at the time.
The redistribution of overseas television revenues, which is now has surpassed the domestic revenue in the UK. That is now the greatest sum of income, and they moved it to being a based upon league position. Just the stupidest thing you could ever do.
I'm going to say, at the time, I thought maybe that was actually them being genuine about being a Champions League team, was that they thought maybe they could crack it, but
I think it was possibly more that the bigger teams threatened to go off alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what it is. I don't see that they were voting against their interest, which clearly they were. I don't think the smaller clubs thought they had a choice in the matter.
Yeah, that's the only way that really makes any sense. I mean, even Sullivan and Gold surely wouldn't have banked upon finishing 8th every year, because I think the way it worked was if you finished in the top 8, you took home more money. I can't remember, actually. I might be wrong on that, but
sounds about right.
Yeah, it's so that's just insane. They've only finished that high once, right, in 10 years. So
yeah, and money's not going to get any lesser in the game either. So it's only going to get worse and worse. I mean, you're saying basically not that the system's rigged, but it's a self-perpetuating kind of top 6, the top 8, because those teams constantly get more revenues. The other tournaments with the Champions League, I mean, this isn't anything new. The Champions League's been going 20 odd years now. Those teams have been talking about breaking off for a long time. They're just in a whole different level. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's summer money in the game. The amount that affects outcomes. I mean, people talk about, and tell you what, Pellegrini's on this list too. People talk about Guardiola. People talk about Mourinho, what great managers they are. But if you look at that, I mean, Mourinho was the first manager to spend over £1 billion. I mean, if you have the ability to buy players, of course you're going to end up being a good manager. That's why Real Madrid are perpetually, quarter-final Champions League and winner of the league domestically. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
The Galactico model.
What's that?
The Galactico model, right?
Yeah.
Buy the best players, no matter how much it costs, from everywhere you possibly can. Have a team of absolute superstars, and you can have any manager in the world sit there and say, yeah, go play football. Yeah.
Well, and that's also why I think probably Pellegrini failed at West Ham in many ways, because you talked about strategy and implementing ideas earlier, Jim, and really the only thing we heard out of him consistently was big team mentality, and that doesn't really work, right? I mean, you have to have better. The most basic way to win a football game is to have better talent than your opposition.
Yeah, I mean, big team mentality to me seems to consist of pretending that he still had Kevin De Bruyne and David Silva playing in midfield for him for 2 years. I mean, just setting up exactly the same way, no matter how you're opposite, who you're up against. That to me was one of the most dismal things actually about Pellegrini, and that sort of refusal to be adaptable or to seemingly have any other way of coaching. I mean, I think one of the things that most impressed me about Moyes actually when he was here before was he was switched between a 4 and a 3 defensively. He was able to coach that into the players. I mean, I've seen some kind of comments about Moyes last time and some of the fairly dismal results that we had, but we had some results that were also pretty impressive, I thought, considering the players and the squad that he inherited. Now, if you remember, we beat Chelsea 1-0 last time. Arnautovic scored after 5 or 6 minutes, and then we defended, brilliantly for the rest of the game. Yeah. We went over to Spurs and drew 1-1. We had one shot, which was Obiang from 30 odd yards, but again defended brilliantly. And we lost 2-1 at Manchester City, which is probably the best away performance I've seen from a West Ham side in donkey's years at the time that it happened. So I feel like Moyes is a lot more adaptable coach. It's interesting that people talk about him as though he's a dinosaur, because I really feel that's just a reflection of the fact that he's been around a long time and he's slightly older. And actually, to me, age isn't really the point for a manager. It's more about intellectual curiosity. And he said some interesting things about Red Bull and Leipzig and Salzburg and all that kind of stuff when he took over, which suggested to me that he was a more adaptable, kind of pragmatic, flexible manager than he's given credit for. So, look, I mean, he's here, so we'll get behind him. But I have some cautious optimism that he might be a guy who has a vision that might stretch beyond the next transfer window, which is sort of what I feel we've been doing for the last half a decade, is just stumbling from one transfer window to the next. How many January transfer windows in a row have we had where the answer has been, we're going to get some bodies in January, try and get through to the summer, and then reassess what we're doing? Barring from possibly last year, I feel like that's been the kind of sequence for every January transfer window since 2016. So, yeah, let's see where he gets us.
One of the things though that I'm constantly harping on, and we just started a new podcast here, Fortune's Always Hiding, and we've only had 3 episodes, and my co-hosts are already sick of me bringing this up, but we don't have a style of play. And if you look at like how Pochettino, how his teams play, if you look at Jurgen Klopp, if you look at to me, the great teams now have a style of play. You know how Manchester City are going to come at you. And we just don't have that. We haven't had it for a long time. And I really believe that Pellegrini was going to solve that. He kept talking about the way he wants to play, how he sets his team up, how he doesn't change, how he doesn't change because the other team will change based on how we play. And I thought, man, that's exactly what we need. And yet that didn't happen really. All that meant was that he was tactically inflexible, and it meant that he would not adapt to the scenario, whether it be the players themselves or what happened in a match. And so after a while, as all that fell apart, I tried to really pick apart really what was going on there. And the style of play is so much more than just a set of instructions on a piece of paper. It has to be, in a way, it goes to the root of what we're all talking about here. It has to be structural in the club itself, right? You have to build it deeper so that your youth team plays this way, right? Your scouts look for players that match your system. I mean, like from the top down, it has to, sweep through your club. And that's in a small way, I guess that's why you get things like people winning with an Allardyce defense, even though it's like, Bobby Brown shoes, right? And he's great if someone before him was a good defensive manager. But I'm really hopeful that maybe Moyes, and it sounds kind of weird, but maybe Moyes, because I think he does have an idea of how he wants us to play. I really do think he already knows kind of where he wants us to go. And all the press conferences he's talked, so far, he's mentioned some pretty intriguing things, like the Red Bull model, like he was just, talking about that. So clearly that's an indication he sees youth as important to his long-term vision of the club. But Pellegrini, I was really hopeful was going to be our answer to this entire style of play issue, and that certainly did not happen.
But will he get that opportunity, right? Because I mean, the only reason he's on an 18-month contract is because he wouldn't sign another 6-month contract.
Yeah,
if you ask me, right? I mean, so
yeah,
that's more short-termism. So what are they actually going to let him do?
I think that's a very good question, and I think the point that John makes is incredibly apt. The way the club, or the way the team, has been put together, it's kind of like the bastard child of like 4 or 5 different managers and 3 or 4 different people above them who've been buying players. There was, Sullivan obviously has been buying players. Husselaar bought players with Pellegrini. There was the guy whose name escapes me from Everton, Tony, the guy who was fired for the racist stuff. His name will come back to me, but he was buying players for a while, kind of in conjunction with Sullivan. And then you have some players who were bought quite a long time ago who are still around the club, like Ogbonna and Cresswell. I'm not saying they should get rid of them, but they're a legacy of 2 or 3, 4 managers ago. So I think it's hard to put together a side if it's put together by different people. And I think this comes back to the point that you were making, is that you need to have some sort of underlying philosophy within a football club, which talks about the type of players that you want. And then even when a manager goes, and this is the whole point of the director of football model, even when the manager goes, that philosophy still remains. You want young, quick players. You want to be a possession-based side, or you want to be a counter-attacking side. You want to be a high-pressing side. You want to be a low block and break, whatever. It doesn't matter. But you have to have something. And I absolutely could not tell you what Pellegrini's philosophy was beyond. I mean, I asked a couple of people about this who know more about Argentinian football than me, and they saw South American football, and they said, yeah, he basically is 4-4-2, and you have like a Riquelme type player in the middle.
Right.
I don't know what. I mean, and I guess they bought enough attacking midfielders, right, that you'd think possibly one of them could have turned into that player, but it didn't. It never really happened, and I'm with you. I hope that Moyes is going to bring a more coherent style of football, and also a more coherent way of running the club. Youth team players should be, brought through in a certain system or whatever. Completely agree with that.
That's why it was so interesting to me that in this match how much we pressed, because that's something that's been missing from our game for so long, and so many other clubs have adapted this. And I mean, the best club in the world at pressing are arguably the top of the Premier League right now. So you have to say it's effective when done correctly. And I know people say we don't have a lot of pace on the side, and that's certainly a problem. That's certainly true. But if we press in packs, if we press as a unit, then you still get a huge effect. And we actually pressed as a football team on the pitch, and there was such a difference. I mean, it was just night and day. And all of a sudden, the the Bournemouth players were looking up, and they really did not know what to do. And they actually, to Bournemouth's credit, played some brilliant football getting out of some of our pressing at times, which I don't think they got credit for. But at the end, they just had nowhere to go. They ran out. They gave the ball away. And that was all down to this energy that we have not seen. And I mean, how long has it been?
I completely agree with you. I mean, it's interesting. I coach my daughter's under 12 side, and pressing is like a common thing that coaches want to do. And watching Bournemouth try and play out from the back reminded me of a kids team who are trying to play against a slightly better team who can press, and they can't do it. And Eddie Howe was like a good youth team coach who was just not worrying about the result and continuing to let his kids play out from the back. That's fine when you're 12, but I thought it was remarkable that they continued to do it.
Yeah.
The problem with the press, to be honest, is you need fit players. You can't do it all day.
No.
The fitness of Liverpool and Tottenham's players when they were good at it, Manchester City, their fitness is another rung up. We don't really have that. I don't think we have the legs. But I agree. I mean, it was noticeable in the stadium how much further. Everything we did was 15, 20 yards further forward. And we also moved the ball like so much quicker than we ever did under Pellegrini.
I'm amazed at how in vogue the press is, to the point where people ignore changing their system to try and force it to work. Arsenal, Jesus Christ, Arsenal this season, playing out from the back against the press. They should have changed that a long, long time ago. I mean, sometimes you do have to hit it long. No, I'm a long ball merchant by any means, but you can't just invite that pressure like Bournemouth did, because it just gets to a weak link at some point, and you get overrun and give the ball up in the air or on the wing anyway. But
even Man City, the only goal that they gave up against Everton, did you see that? Bravo passes it, and it gets intercepted, and And actually, I thought Everton had completely wasted the chance. They ended up just kind of passing it around, and I think it was maybe Keane tried to dribble straight through. But then they get a cross in and the goal, and it's all because they gave it away. So even the best at it sometimes make mistakes. It's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
But to your point, yeah, I mean, especially if you're already 2-0 down and you're being pressed to death and it's not working, adapt.
It's so high risk too. And my biggest takeaway, I think, from the first Moyes game was, the press. That was good. It was interesting. The energy levels were interesting. Getting rid of the fucking offside trap and actually having somebody on their man, facing them square, and allowed to face the attacker instead of waiting to jump in front and let everything slip in behind, and then 2 banks of 4 on a line. The defense, the midfield, actually, just the cohesion and the understanding of where everybody was. I think we've been so discombobulated with trying to get the offside trap right. It's high risk, it's high reward, but we didn't really reap any of those rewards. And I'm happy to at least see that gone. Not completely, but as at times we were offside trap first was always our mantra. That's kind of what we went to. And that's not going to work against every team. It certainly didn't work against teams like Newcastle. When they know it's coming, you play the ball backwards and then a quick chip over the top with runners coming in behind, and you see what happens. But
that probably goes back a little bit, John, to this notion of how weirdly the squad has been put together. Because why would you have Ryan Fredericks as your first choice right back and Pablo Zabaleta as your second when they're completely different types of player and they have different attributes? And so, that lack of consistency in buying the players for the squad also meant that, when you have injuries or when you have drops of form or suspensions or whatever, I think it's quite hard to be consistent when the players you're bringing in are not like for like. So I'll be interested. I don't think he'll be pressing high all season because I just don't think we're good enough at it. And it'd be interesting. I think the next game is Sheffield United away, or next league game is Sheffield United away. I'd be interested to see if he presses them, because they're a very well drilled, well coached team who, if we give them tons of space in behind, because obviously when you press, you leave an awful lot of space behind for teams to play into. So I think he'll be adaptable. I think, we're kind of coming full circle, but I think Moyes is a pretty adaptable coach. And I think he'll use it when necessary.
So, Jim, we've spoken a lot tonight about different aspects of where the failings of the club are. What does that really speak to the wider culture at West Ham? Like, how would you describe West Ham's culture? Where is it that we're going wrong, and where do you think improvements would have the most impact?
Well, I guess I view the culture as being in a couple of different parts. You have the kind of day-to-day running of the club, right? When you go to the ticket office, when you go to the club shop, when you, take your child to be a mascot, whatever it might be. And that kind of stuff, as far as I can tell anyway, sits underneath Karen Brady, who is charitably part-time in that role. And I think it's fair to say fairly heavily invested in her own brand. So to my mind, there is actually quite a large gap in at West Ham where a kind of commercial director or, as someone, there would be a leader who's there all the time setting the tone. Think of the best businesses you ever worked in, best places you ever worked. There was someone, a kind of a personality at the center of that who led by example and set the tone, set the culture. And that might be the CEO, it might be the MD, whatever. It depends on the place you work. That seems to be missing at West Ham, and that's why I think I keep coming back to this point of they see us as customers. It's a transactional experience to be a fan of West Ham now. There's lots of really good people who work at the club, but I think there is a massive gap in the middle. And similarly on the playing side, you have no director of football. You have a manager who is always a short-term appointment, who's always going to be looking, because it's human nature, at keeping their own job by winning games in the short term. So it's hard to have a long-term vision. It's hard to buy players and think we'll invest in them over the next 2 or 3 years. So, the culture to me, there's two things. They need a director of football who's clearly going to set up all the stuff that we've been talking about structuring the footballing side of the club, take power away from Sullivan, work closely with someone like Moyes to set the vision and all the good stuff that John was talking about with the youth team and all that. That's got to come from that person. Then I think on the flip side, on the commercial side, you need someone who's there full time, who isn't just interested in pushing their own career, but who's interested in making West Ham an elite place. Let's have the best youth team academy in the world. Let's have the best data analysts in the world. Let's have the best experience possible. Buying tickets. Why is that such a onerous task to ring up Ticketmaster and be on hold for 25 minutes to get through? There's just a lot of stuff. Wherever you touch the club, it feels to me like it's just slightly behind. It's not quite as good as it could be. And again, I think that comes back to the culture at the top. And I think it's kind of a black hole that sits there at the moment under Brady.
Is that on purpose?
Is that on purpose? I'm not sure it's on purpose. I think it's just that it's not deemed to be necessary.
It's negligent.
Well, it's definitely negligent. I think it is negligent, or it's at least stupid to piss off your fan base or your customer base. But I think there's a kind of a feeling with football fans that you can push them because they're always going to come back. So, why do you have to make the match day experience all that much better at the London Stadium when they're going to come back anyway, especially if they've bought a season ticket?
So that's a nice tie into this question we just had from Tommy here in the chat rooms. What are your thoughts on the independent order that was carried out on the club
Can we talk about that picture? Good Lord, Tommy.
Yeah, I don't want to piss Tommy off.
Oh, Christ, Tommy.
Yeah.
We'll just call him the gun from now on.
Could he tell me his thoughts before I commit?
What do you want to say, Tom?
Yeah. Well,
Sorry.
I think it's interesting. It's a good question. I'm not just saying that because I'm terrified of him. I think it's a good question. So for those who don't know, this was reported in the Athletic article in the week where it was said that after Moyes, or when Moyes was here before, maybe just before he left, he told Sullivan that they just didn't have an infrastructure in place that could support an elite football team. And they had an independent audit done. I have no idea who did that or who even would do it. But apparently those people came in and were absolutely astonished at West Ham's scouting structure and lack of analytics team and lack of even just like people in key positions. And
4 full-time scouts.
It was something like that, right? Or 5 scouts for Europe or something.
Yeah.
You know, like Southampton have got more for like the northeast of England or just something. I don't know, something insane.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but again, it's kind of indicative probably of what happens when you rely on agents to bring you players. But to the question, that independent audit, as far as I can tell, was never acted on. So when Moyes came back, the first thing he kind of did was say, well, what did you do about all of this stuff that I told you? And the answer was, well, we just hired Pellegrini and he put his family members in those positions. And they've now all gone. So I think this comes back to the point, and I guess maybe what the independent audit should have told them is that this structure needs to exist irrespective of who's managing the club. So the director of football, the chief scout, the chief analyst, whatever, high performance people, academy directors, all that kind of stuff, they shouldn't be coming and going with the manager. The manager is arguably the person with the least job security in a football club, right? You don't fire your ticket office manager every 18 months, but you may well fire your first team coach every 18 months. So it shouldn't be entirely dependent upon that person. That person should come in and fit in with your structure. They shouldn't come in and dictate that structure. So weirdly, Moyes would be making himself slightly obsolete by building a structure for the future. But that's the job that I hope he's going to do. Whether he will, I guess, or whether he'll be allowed to is another matter.
He did it before. He's done it before at Everton.
He did.
But it has been a while since he's been at Everton. So and was it Cartwright? Is that who was in charge of Everton at the time?
Bill Kenwright, yeah. And I think you have to get enough currency, right? Internal currency to be able to do that stuff. It's like any job, actually, any business that you go into. You can't probably arrive on day one and make tons of changes. You do have to kind of credentialize yourself a bit within the organization. We'll see. We'll see if he has
that almost feels like double negligence. A, get the results and then not act upon them. Or B, if you knew you weren't going to act upon the results, why spend the money to get the study done in the first place? But who knows with these lots? So
yeah. Why ask a surveyor to come around and tell you that you've got damp and then ignore it? That's
exactly.
essentially what it is.
That's mad, absolutely mad. But just 1 or 2 questions left, and then we'll do our rapid fire, and we'll tie this all up. I know Tim and the guys have got another show coming on at 8, so everybody in the chat room, please stick around for that. Or it won't be here; it'll be at a different link. But make sure you come back to YouTube for that. So, just wanted to ask: we've spoken a lot about the board and the club and the culture around it. Do you think the fans have any culpability in all this? I mean, does the restless rabble of internet warriors, and I certainly include myself in that, do we hinder any of the decisions being made behind the scenes? Do we have influence over these decisions? Is some of this short-termism because it's reactionary to what's going on?
It's an interesting question. I'm loath to blame fans for decisions made in boardrooms. That seems crazy. But I think the one thing which is interesting about West Ham, and I'm not sure it's unique, but it's unusual, is that I think that the owners are like incredibly reactive to fan sentiment, and I don't actually think that's helpful. I think the reality is if you have something that you believe in, and if you have a coherent strategy and you have a long-term plan, you shouldn't be put off by short-term sentiment. In the end, fan sentiment is almost entirely swayed by the last result. Everyone's pretty happy now. We just played Bournemouth off the pitch. Bournemouth was shit, but we played them off the pitch. And everyone's happy about that. If we get knocked out by Gillingham on Sunday, on Monday, everyone's going to be unhappy again. that's what being a football fan is about. And like, I don't think that's wrong, but that shouldn't influence your decision. You know, if you think selling Declan Rice is a good thing to do because it fits into a strategy that you have, and I'm not suggesting that, you know, I'm not running this up the flagpole with my great idea, but I'm just saying if you believe that selling Rice is something that you need to do to move the club forward, then do it. Don't not do it because you're worried about how fans will feel. I mean, let's look back, right? They should have sold Payet after Euro 2016, but they couldn't because of fan sentiment. Everyone would have gone absolutely crazy. But that's when they could have got 50 or 60 million for him, you know? That's what the links were to Real Madrid. And I think actually the best run organizations, and I'm not just talking about football now, European football, a lot of baseball and NFL teams make their decisions completely in a vacuum. They do not worry about fan sentiment, and they make decisions that they think need to be made to take the club forward. Therefore, to get back to your original question, John, I don't really think fans can be blamed, but I do think fan sentiment seems to influence them. And actually, I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, because fans don't have a full view over we don't have much of a view over anything, right? But certainly none of the three of us have any insight into anybody's medical records at West Ham, right? If they think Declan Rice has got a long-term injury coming because he's been playing with sell him, right? If that's the knowledge that you have that fans don't have, but then you can't worry about fans being upset about that. So I wouldn't blame fans. I would blame the owners, because they should be more intelligent than that.
I think that's a very valid point. Johnny, you got any questions before we get into the rapid fire for Jim?
You know, I did, but I've already forgot them all. You know, Jim is too intelligent himself and talks too much. So I don't know.
Well, I definitely talk too much, maybe.
I guess we'll get right into this. These will be probably the easiest questions of the night. It's a top 10 that we ask all people that we interview on American Hammers TV. So the first one has deemed some pretty interesting responses depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on, and that is meat pie or apple pie?
Meat pie.
Any in particular?
Steak and ale.
That's a wise choice. Who is your favorite current West Ham player?
That's a good question. I'll go with Lanzini. I was at Wembley for the 3-2 comeback win against Spurs, which was Lanzini inspired. So he has forever a place in my heart.
And who frustrates you the most in the current West Ham squad?
I don't know how much time we've got. Who frustrates me the most? Possibly Yarmolenko.
That's not a bad choice. He certainly. It'll be interesting to see if he gets any kind of striker time under Moyes, if we can get him fit.
I think they may sell him, actually, but that's just a guess. I'm not sure.
He carried us for the first part of the year, didn't he? And then after the first part of the season, and then just faded away after that.
Yeah, it just shows these glimpses, doesn't he? But would you take FA Cup or top 4 finish?
Top 4 finish.
Really? You want to expand on that?
Yeah, that'd be Champions League, right? So that means a Champions League run. I'm already sort of regretting the answer.
Jim, I'm counting that as a pro board answer.
Pro board, yeah. Look, I want David Sullivan to know.
Remember what Wenger said: top 4 is like a trophy.
Top 4 is like a trophy. Yeah, I think it would just be like, well, hang on a minute, right? If we finish top 4, we'd have to have an incredible season, right? Like,
it's true.
Yeah, you know, that, like, we all think that it was incredible in 15-16 when Payet was there and we finished 7th. So think about how much better it would be finishing 4th. You know, I'm slightly regretting it because I feel like proper football fans probably answer that by saying FA Cup, but I'm going to stick and say top 4.
I think the majority we've had have said FA Cup. There's definitely been a good contingent of top 4 answers as well. What about West Ham do you love?
That's a good question. What about West Ham do I love? I love the history. I love like feeling like I'm part of something which is not available to everybody. Like, it's easy. Anyone can support Liverpool, right? It's just, you know, and there are tons of people where I live around here who support Liverpool, but I don't think they have any particular link to Liverpool beyond the fact that they were maybe successful in the 80s when they were kids. I feel like supporting West Ham is like being part of a secret tribe of people who only fellow tribesmen and women can understand the suffering of being a West Ham fan. I feel, everyone thinks their club is unique. I don't think West Ham is better or worse than any other football club, but it's mine and it's my family's and it's where I'm from, and I feel very proud of it and I love it.
I think that's something we always highlight with our American Hammers because, they obviously have the choice of any club in the world.
Yes.
And they have enough self-loathing that they go and support a silly team like West Ham. So
it is too, because if you want to love this little thing right here, then you have to hate yourself a little bit.
I got to tell you, like, I'm not just saying this because I'm on the American Hammers show, but I have almost greater respect for foreign fans than I do for those of us we have no choice, right? I was born in a West Ham family. You people. I don't know what everyone's story, but by and large, like some of you certainly will have chosen to support West Ham, and you've stuck with it, which I think is worthy of great admiration. So you have my undying respect.
Well, what kind of character would a person have if they chose West Ham after 2 seasons? Went, this is terrible. Tottenham, hello. Especially if they ever met a Tottenham fan, then they'd be like, oh well, I can't do that.
You wouldn't believe the amount of Spurs fans in this country either. I do not understand it at all.
Well, because they're good.
And
Americans, we love a winner, So I mean, there are a lot of Americans. They only think
they won
6 clubs in England. So,
oh well,
that's changing.
Well, going on from self-loathing, what about West Ham? Do you hate?
Well, probably we've covered quite a lot of it. It's perhaps the feeling of. Currently, it's the feeling of listlessness, that we're just drifting, waiting for someone to arrive with a vision. And it, in that sense, I hate that. I also confess to hating the walk from Westfield to the stadium, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's not the same as the old place. I've only managed to get back home once to do it so far. And just traditions and rituals all change, but I'm sure we'll make our own over time. But it was certainly a big wake up call. You can keep this PG-13 if you want, or you could go somewhere else with it. What sound makes you happy?
What sound makes me happy? We're talking West Ham now, right? That's up to
you, but yeah.
I don't think I will ever lose the childish kind of sense of elation that I get when I hear the start of Bubbles. And there's just something about that kind of gets me out of my seat, that takes me from a different place, takes me from where I am to being in the moment of the team are coming out, the game's about to start. And that will always kind of stay with me. Curiously, another thing I also love is when I go to away games and you hear the roar of the home crowd and then it dies down because we've done something, with a keeper save or whatever. Now, that's just a weird thing, but I've always kind of enjoyed that moment in away grounds when you score, or you're on top of the game, so it's only West Ham fans that you can hear singing. That's also that's great. And I took my kids to their first away game a few years ago, which was when we won 5-1 at Blackburn in the Cup in the Payet season, and it was just like crazy, 5,000 people going bananas at a ground where we'd lost like 7-1 previously. So there was just something very, there's something great about that feeling of going elsewhere and lording it up a bit. Doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, I think that's good as well.
I don't think we've heard you swear tonight, but if you were to swear, what's your favorite curse word?
I've got an Irish background, so my family use gobshite with a degree of frequency that I think we quite like. So I'll go with that.
That's a classic. What team do you love to beat?
Spurs, certainly. Always enjoy beating Spurs. I will say Sheffield United. I'm not sure we've beaten them since the Tevez thing. And next Monday would be a fine time to start that. But I don't like them subsequent to all of that nonsense. But yeah, Spurs. Like, come on, it's got to be.
That's pretty unanimous, I think, around here. Name a player, past or present, who epitomizes West Ham for you.
Ian Bishop, great player, flighty, probably underachieved, but always worth watching.
Great player. And if you haven't seen the episode, there's a Friday Night Lights episode where we interview Bish.
Yeah.
It was just so much fun to do, and he was a gentleman with his time and with his answers. But I remember him, and I remember West Ham, we were always kind of known for that kind of player, whether it was Bishop or Benayoun. We never really replaced those guys moving into the kind of the 2000s era, just past that. I mean, but he had such a good eye, such good vision, such a hard worker, and really made that midfield tick over.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I mean, he was one of my favorite players as a kid, and you know, he was captain of that team in, I think, 90 or 91 when we came up. And he kind of had the long hair. He was number 7. He was 2-footed. You know, there was just something almost romantic about him. And my dad and I, you know, I think he had something different from other players. He wasn't just the kind of workaday footballer. You know, he had a bit more vision. He had a bit more flair in a team that didn't have a ton of it. But he also, you know, had to put up with a lot of shit. You know, he got like all that stuff about him being gay, and all that was just nonsense. Yeah. There was all those rumors and that innuendo that kind of followed him around, you know, and I always greatly admired him for that. And I wrote a series of articles a couple of years ago called In Retro, which were looking back. And I did Jack Collison, Trevor Sinclair, and Ian Bishop. So I say a series. I did 3. But you know, Bish got in touch with me to say thank you for that, which he didn't have to do. I'm just a blogger, you know, from the internet. You know, and exchanged a couple of messages. So yeah, which kind of cemented the fact that I think he was. I was right to give him my love as a youngster, which sounds weird. I didn't that come across oddly, but he was a big fan. I was a big fan of his.
He was brilliant. I mean, if you were going to talk about West Ham culture, at least the style of play that you expect out of a West Ham team, he would kind of be at the heart of that for me. And just, you know, through the ages, we've always had, or at least I like to think we've always had somebody that had a little bit of that silky skill paired with the work ethic and, you know, just kind of blue collar football, really. But so important to my West Ham growing up, as he said, like early 90s, really cemented what the team meant to me. So, Last question for you. If you could take a time machine back to experience anything to do with West Ham, where would you go?
Yeah, that is a great question. So believe it or not, the only game that I missed from about 1990 to like 2012 or something, the only game I missed through illness was the FA Cup final in 2006. Oof. So there is a part of me that would very much like to go, but it's a small part, right? You know, because I can't bring myself to even watch that game again. But there is a part of me that's like, I can't believe I missed out on the kind of the greatest FA Cup final of the modern era. But I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say I'd love to go back to like the 70s. One of those games under the lights, something like Eintracht Frankfurt, which West Ham fans of an older generation tell me that game was absolutely incredible. Which I believe someone might correct me, but I'm pretty sure it was the second leg of the European Cup Winners' Cup semi-final, I think, in 75-76, played at Upton Park, and I think Graham Padden scored a screamer from 30 yards or something. So I think I'd love to go back and watch. And also that would be a chance to watch like Brooking, Bonds, that era of player that I never got to see because I first started going in kind of 84-5. Those guys were either on the way out or you know, not playing. So I'm going to say one of those kind of 70s midweek under the lights games. I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think that would be brilliant. When I was first interviewed on the show, I think my answer I gave was the '66 World Cup final.
Okay.
I think, you know, I've had a bit of time to think about it now, and something, you know, like Greenwood era, after he's seen how football's played in Hungary, and he revolutionizes kind of the English game in that way, just to be there around that and see what he was doing that wasn't happening in England, and the transformation, I think, would be really fascinating as well. But there's no length of stuff that you couldn't go back to with West Ham. Rich history of 60s, 70s, even 80s, boys of 86 we've had a few times.
Yeah.
FA Final 1980 we've had a few times. John, what was your one? I don't remember your one.
The FA Cup final in 1980. Though, you know, part of me wants to go and just see that DiCanio goal. You know, part of me, I mean, just to see it, just to be live. Could you imagine?
That's one. That one's trotted out every year in the highlights.
I was at that game. That was pretty. That was
get rid of him. Get rid of him.
He has to go and do that.
I'm sorry. That was incredible. Yeah, that was
amazing. Well, Jim, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll see you back in the green room in a second, as we like to call it. Everybody in the chat room, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't read the H-List article, please go there. It's the hList.blogspot.com. You can find Jim on social media. He's on Twitter, as he said, at the H-List, right, Jim?
That's right. Yep.
I'm John Nolan. You can follow me at that handle up there. Johnny Arrow at that handle up there. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel. We're on our final push to get it over 1,000 subs. We really love to get that number going. Please subscribe if you can.
We'll get there tonight, guys. Just
with your help.
We'll get there tonight. Seriously,
we're really there tonight. So thank you all for tuning in. Please stay tuned. Like I said, Tim and the boys have another show coming up in about 10 minutes, I believe. So stick around, and they'll be talking more West Ham and probably a little bit more about Moyes and the gang and the game, which we really didn't get into so much. So apart from that, thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, chat room, and come on, you Irons.